recording. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this BioWednesday webinar discussing is the UK Life Science 10-year vision in focus. So as you may have already noticed, this session is going to be recorded and will be made available after the session. You'll receive a link. Throughout the session, we want it to be kind of interactive, so please feel free to use the chat box to post any questions, and you might be invited to come off your mic if you wish. So Tony's going to begin by giving us just a brief introduction to the session, and we've also got Sam Taylor here from PwC, who's very kindly agreed to set the scene for us. So without further ado, over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Jazz, and welcome everyone to this August BioWednesday, which I don't know, I never considered BioWednesdays would be things online for about 2 decades until COVID hit like the rest of us. But it's great to see a gathering here, and I think what's really timely for me about this and having discussion about the vision for UK life sciences is what everyone's been through in their personal and work lives, and certainly this sector and the way it's responded. And we're increasingly looking to what are we going to do next, and where do we harness the strengths we've uncovered. And some of that has been a surprise to some quarters that we had strengths of the depth we have in life sciences. It shouldn't have been, but it was. And I guess being someone who suffers watching rugby and the British Lions down in South Africa, I was reminded, thinking about this vision for UK life sciences, about a quote from Nelson Mandela, where he said, "Vision without action is just a dream. Action without vision is just passing the time, but a vision with action can really change the world." And I kind of felt that's where this vision could be if it gets delivered. But I guess what I was hoping today we could have a great conversation through and just see how confident we felt collectively that the vision set out by the government and its many contributors. Do we think we can achieve that, and will it change the world? Will it reshape what the UK, even the UK economy looks like going forward, if it plays out the way they suggest? But certainly it will help patients around the world if it comes to pass. So that's kind of the backdrop of why I was interested to have the discussion with you all. I'm delighted we have Sam Taylor as a partner of PwC, who's going to just set the scene about, recap of, I guess, of what the vision is and what we think it is, and then we can interact around whether it's in focus or not. And I look forward to that as we go forward. But I think it's probably better just to hand over to you, Sam, and kick it off.
Brilliant, thank you, Tony. And as you said, I'm a partner from PwC, and I head up our life sciences practice in the UK. So it was interesting. We were having a chat earlier on, and I think it's easy to start on a skeptical note about the 10-year vision, but I'm deliberately not going to, because our fundamental position is having a vision is better than having no vision, which is what the position that we were in previously. So I think any focus that the government is placing on this has got to be a positive. The overall perspective of the vision is looking at, we have done a great job as an industry in terms of the response to COVID. Now you can read the report and kind of think, right, well, it was purely the government who have responded to COVID and solved COVID. But there is a lot of credit given to the industry, and what the vision is looking at is how can we utilize the sort of response that we have for COVID to accelerate other areas of life science. And in itself, I think that is a sensible proposition to put forward and a good basis on which to create the vision in the first place. There are 7 missions included in the vision. So these are different therapeutic areas that the vision is going to focus on. Again, I think a lot of these make perfect sense. There's a couple in terms of vaccines and work in the respiratory areas, which the vision acknowledges we're already strong at, and those were demonstrated as part of COVID. And the vision is looking at maintaining our world leading status in those 2 areas, which again I think is very sensible. What it then does is take on 5 other areas, and again I think those are areas that we can't dispute albeit though that they are huge in kind of the level that needs to be tackled. So they picked out dementia, they picked out vaccines in relation to cancer, obesity, aging, and mental health. And the last three in particular, big areas of focus and big areas of need, albeit we are at a very early stage in terms of some of the scientific advances compared to where we are on vaccines at the moment, for example. Big themes coming through the vision, which I think you cannot disagree with, to remove the unnecessary bureaucracy that currently exists in the world of life science. And one of the things that COVID has shown is that with some real desire to move quickly, things can progress through at a faster rate than they have done historically. There's also a focus on maintaining that agility that the MHRA showed throughout COVID. I guess we encourage that. I guess the one kind of question that we raise as part of that is, does that mean that we're trying to become almost the kind of path of least resistance from a regulator, which as we was shown through our approval of the AstraZeneca vaccine, it could have implications on how seriously we're taken as a regulator on the global scale. There's a lot of talk about cultivating the right business environment, which I think is you can't argue with. It's quite hard to measure how do you actually achieve that. The big thing that we like, the Life Sciences Investment Programme, and in particular 200 million allocated to the British Patient Capital. Again, you cannot argue that that's a good thing. It will be very interesting to see how that's allocated and who is responsible for that being allocated and what stage of development that's allocated to. And even with the 800 million that's been pledged from the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund, as we know, that's £1 billion is not an insignificant amount of money, but when the average cost of taking a drug from inception through to approval is $950 million, it's not going to make a massive impact on its own in those 7 areas that have been identified. The last thing I'd pull out, and I'm not sure, and I don't think we're quite sure how to interpret these, are the preconditions that the government have put as to whether this is going to be a success or not. It's a slightly strange thing to do, to say here's our vision, but here are the 4 things that may well mean it won't work. And the visions that they're putting in is the oversight of NHS data, which I think most people have known for a long time is we haven't made the most of the NHS and the ability to get data from the NHS and put that back into the life sciences industry for scientific development. Making the NHS an innovation partner, which on a similar thing, I think is something that people have grappled with for a long time. And I guess probably the one that we really question, what can be done to achieve this. Increasing the level of UK R&D spend. Again, question how much can that be influenced by the government themselves, and then also the UK access, broadening the UK access to finance. But we probably think this is the one that is most key at the moment. There's absolutely no doubt that we have a fantastic platform from an academic perspective. What we have seen, particularly over the last 5 years, is that move from academic research through to later stage clinical trials in the life sciences sector is very, very hard to do in the UK without going overseas for investment. And that's the one where I guess we're interested to know what that means. So does it mean trying to take development of drugs, development of medical devices and development of diagnostics further in the UK, or does it mean supporting more clinical development of more products at an earlier stage? So I guess, Tony, that's a very high level view of, and I pulled out some of the questions we're asking ourselves as part of looking at that document as well.
Thanks, Sam. I mean, I say hopefully this will be as interactive as it can be in these circumstances. So I would encourage people to drop anything into the chat box, and I'll pick it up from there and come back to you as best we can work it in. I mean, so just before we get into the UK vision, you know, PwC being global in multiple markets and countries around the world, you know, every country presumably has seen the value of life sciences and what's needed going forward, almost irrespective of where their baseline was. Is the UK unusual in creating such a vision like this, or are other European countries and US, etc., doing the same right now?
Yeah, we have seen similar in Germany and Switzerland, which I guess are you know, if from a European perspective are two of the established companies in terms of their sectors. It's interesting, you know, if you look at where the powerful clusters are, a lot of those reside in the US, which is I guess driven by the capital markets without the need for huge amounts of government intervention. And I guess the great advantage that the US has over others is that's essentially the primary end market for a lot of the products that are being developed, whether they be new drugs or diagnostics. The market in the US is there, and so there's an obvious domestic target market for those companies already.
Yeah, and you know, I guess even if you look at the way sort of recent history plays out, the US has remained that end market, and it's not changing rapidly in when I talk to companies and where they aspire to go to raise capital or take their products either directly or indirectly to market. And I was just thinking overall in the vision, you know, a lot of the build back better and rhetoric and wordsmithing around the government policy generally coming out of COVID and even through it, sort of we're talking about bringing, you know, we've done great stuff in diagnostics, but we didn't have enough capacity, or we didn't have enough capacity in manufacturing of medical technology. I didn't get a sense in the vision there was too much talked about in those areas of what life sciences as a end-to-end chain of things, rather than the innovation and maybe even invention end of it. I mean, what was your take on medtech?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that the vision points to the fact that, you know, for the first time in a long time, we saw industry, we saw early stage companies, and we saw academia working together. And you know, it highlights that that's a formula that that they would like to see replicated across their other missions, as they put them. I think that how achievable that is, I think, is quite difficult, because you know, what we have seen probably over the last 10 years is a divergence between, I guess, the big pharmaceutical companies and the early stage medtech companies or the early stage biotech companies. And it's that gap that I think the UK has really struggled with. And as you say, you know, part of that is developing manufacturing capability, which the reality is, you know, if you compare that side of things in the UK to other domestic markets, we do fall back on. And where we have seen the government invest in those areas, you know, one of the kind of big success stories has been what's happened in Wales and the Welsh government and the funding that they've put forward. So we've shown that it does work if you have a strategic focus on that as well. I think the Welsh government probably came at it from a view of job creation as opposed to the ultimate goal. But the vision itself doesn't, you're correct, it doesn't have a huge amount of focus in that kind of the period between the development of the drug or the product initially and kind of the commercial market, which I think that is where the focus does need to happen.
Which, you know, that's sort of, you know, one of the first sort of preconditions they set out was how these stakeholders, the NHS, government and industry, will collaborate more, and that needs to happen if we can achieve this vision. I mean, I kind of feel there's been lots of progress in that space. I mean, it kind of feels like there hasn't been, when every strategy has a line there saying we're going to make the NHS innovation champion or variation thereof in its wording. And I guess there's a little part of me that's kind of bitter and twisted, if it's a bit harsh, but thinks, oh, it's the same thing again. But actually, there is progress being made all the time. And COVID has kind of demonstrated how it can work. and work effectively.
Yeah.
What do you feel has been the biggest barriers, and why have we not got beyond that opening gambit statement in strategies way back? I think it was called Big T way back about 20 years ago. That Richard Sykes led was going to make the NHS an innovation channel. What's held that back? Why are we still asking the same question?
Well, I'd probably say, and what I'd probably say, it's the direct impact of doing it that has been really hard to achieve, and it's one of the things that was achieved through COVID. So, COVID, you had a massive problem which was on the doorstep that everyone was aware of, and what we were able to do was to generate data from the NHS, which you could almost feed back into the system in real time to change the development, and because of the real focus and the desire to get this kind of solved as soon as possible, you saw the emphasis of everyone and the desire for everyone to be part of this. And I think where we've struggled in the past, if you look at some of the areas that they talked about, so things like cancer vaccines and dementia, it's actually quite hard and takes a long time for that data to be fed back. So there's not the desire, I think, of the NHS to be able to do it because there's no immediate benefit. There's no desire from the individual patients themselves because it's not going to help them. And I'm hoping, and I think we're hoping, that what COVID has done is kind of highlight that actually, if this data process does work and it can work effectively, then you can accelerate the results and increase the agility, which is exactly what they're talking about, across a broad spectrum. Now whether that does make a difference, what's happened on COVID, I guess remains to be seen.
And do you get a sense as well? I mean, if we're kind of, I suppose, realistic, or I suppose maybe I'm a bit pessimistic at times, but when I just look at the scale the UK has, we've got an NHS that's been stretched to the limits in what it can do over the past year and a half, and it's still got a lot of backlog on the day job to catch up with. Should the UK in its vision be thinking, we've got a great position in cell and gene therapies where, I don't know, it's 35% or more of the trials are happening. Is it sensible for the UK if they try and focus more than try and tackle all these big areas?
I think it's great. I think the point that you make is very valid, that if this is assigned to the NHS to almost themselves to become the innovation partner, it's always going to fall down the list of priorities, because there are, there will be, for a couple of years at least, a massive backlog of things that they are trying to achieve that have been delayed due to COVID. I think that there is a willingness, and I think it's the right time to try and strike and kind of make the most of that willingness to try and advance other things. It is a case of how do you force that innovation to happen at a time when everyone is so busy, and that's, I think, that the government don't have it down as a precondition. I think it's probably the thing that the government themselves can actually put the most impetus behind to help make it happen better than it has done before, because it's not a new vision that this is what we want. It's just been really difficult to achieve in the past. Yeah,
I don't think it's been, it's not the fact I was asking why is that statement still there. I don't think it's been for the lack of desire to do it. It's just very, very difficult.
Great.
For all those reasons. Maybe this is a good time in some ways, because we've set a few polls up during this and focused around those preconditions. So I'm going to ask Jazz from somewhere in the background to make the first poll live. But it's to do with, we just sort of be interested to see what the group felt in terms of degrees of confidence that these preconditions will be met. And the first one relates specifically to this NHS government industry working in partnership. So the polling's open. I'm going to ask everyone to vote, and we'll see how optimistic a group we are. Everyone's feeling a bit quiet. Like that was more considered coming in there. I guess it's noticeable on the the results that we don't see anybody in the 80 to 100% confident that that's actually going to play out. Maybe that's not too surprising, but I think it's quite encouraging, really, that you've got, you know, the biggest winner there is the 40 to 60%. So middle ground, it could go either way. But I personally don't think that's a bad place to feel. I don't know. I'd be interested in comments from anybody else as to why, you know, if anybody you thought was in that 0 to 20% would like to speak up as to why they felt that was it. It's anonymous, so I can't pick on you as such, rest assured. I just wonder if anyone feels bold enough, because we can take the poll down so we can see the screen.
Hey, can I have a word?
Yeah, sure.
I'm on the board of a medical device company which has been working internationally, and the problem we find in the NHS is that we think of the NHS as a single body. In fact, it's not. It's thousands of bodies, and you can make real progress in one hospital, but that doesn't translate across the rest of the NHS. You have to go to the next hospital and go to the 9 committees in that hospital that are needed to approve use of a device in that hospital, and you make progress, but only in that hospital. You have to go to the next one. It's just not joined up in terms of an organization. So I think I put 0 to 20 because I think it's a really hard call to see the NHS changing that much.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And with that fragmentation as well, I guess what sort of simmers underneath that is the different priorities across all of those different avenues. You know, they've all got, you know, some areas have higher incidence of some disorders and diseases they have to deal with compared to others, or budget constraint. But I mean, you've spent time in the US as well, Keith, and obviously, you know, your company's engaged there. How do you feel that's different in the US, where it's obviously a very different healthcare system and the scale's different, but equally it is fragmented? You're just on mute, I think.
I think it's different in the US because of the insurance companies and the fact that they can apply pressure for something to be used if they see an economic benefit from it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which does put some pressure on the hospital groups to do something different.
Okay. Well, I guess if anyone's feeling bold enough that was on the more optimistic end of the 60 to 80% that feels it can be done, it'd be great to hear a view of upbeat and how we align these things. If anyone's bold enough or not. Maybe not, we've got some shy people on. But I think, again, I guess it, you know, it's not really comparable to a herd immunity, but it's how many of those different customers and hospitals, if you like, do we need to bring onto the same thing to make the change happen, and how can we sell this collective dream, I guess, is maybe the biggest challenge. But I think the fact that it's been there in every strategy, that we need to get more innovation with the NHS, kind of tells us just how difficult that particular factor is. Even if it is a precondition to succeeding. But you know, let's live in hope that we see enough progress. And I kind of feel, in many respects, personally, that, you know, over the recent years we've had the formation of things like NIHR and many other initiatives that have gone a long way down this track compared to where we were when I was first moaning about it on platforms and saying we're getting nowhere. I still keep moaning. I seem to have created a nice niche for myself of being moaning, and I'm good at that bit. But it's, I do feel it's sometimes the skepticism or the size of the challenge can mask how much progress we've actually made. So even within some of the messaging coming out, not from our sector, but whether politically or other sectors, the surprise of how strong our life sciences sector actually was seemed to be on the face of some, which was a bit of an anathema. But I guess the other side of that then, and I know something, it's Sam, you and I sort of chatted about this before, it's about that making it a superpower in the UK and getting to 2.4% of GDP, and the amount of government money that can go in to supporting and cornerstoning that. given the size of money that's gone in around COVID. I mean, what's your views around that in terms of a straight economic argument? Does it stack up?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the amount of money that's, they're putting forward in British patient capital, for example, as I said, I mean, I think any money is encouraging. It's a pretty small amount of money on the grand scheme of things. But the reality was they had to start somewhere, because it's kind of they were never going to be able to put a amount of money that made a stratospheric difference all in one go. But I think that what it has done is kind of put down a marker. It's interesting because I know that they've kind of consulted with industry. I think it's interesting, that they haven't done it through the more traditional routes, through the expansion of R&D tax credits and those sorts of things. And I think it's encouraging that they're opening up different options for funding through the British patient capital. And that is the area. I mean, we've seen, I've mentioned it before, we've seen over the last 5 years that with the issues around funds like Woodford and others kind of leaving the sector, that it does leave a capital gap in the UK. And it's meant that a number of companies have had no other option other than to look overseas and largely to the US, kind of get that funding. And I think that's the area that as an industry we're missing out on, because inevitably when that funding goes overseas, operations and parts of the organizations also go overseas as well, which is, it's good for the development of the device or the diagnostic or the treatment. It's not good for the British life sciences industry, because it does mean that you kind of reach a point and then you're almost selling off to the US at that point. As I said, this in itself and the Abu Dhabi money is not going to solve it, but we have seen positive signs. So we have seen, new funds in the UK over the last 12 months. I think buoyed by the fact that there is so much interest in the sector, and I think those together with the government money will be a start, and hopefully we'll start to see companies not feeling they have to take the option of going overseas at kind of that second funding round stage that we've probably seen for the last 5 years.
I guess, I mean, I probably should know the answer to this, but I'll apologize to the group here. I don't, but you might. Looking towards that 2.4% target in 2027, where are we now?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how big a gap we were trying to bridge here, if I'm being honest, now that I was thinking about it a bit harder. But again, I think it's with that, how important in this, I guess, thinking about the vision and particularly in that sort of target of making us a superpower and supportive and creating the right business environment. Accepting the government can't pay for all of this, so it's going to need to bring in, obviously, a lot of private capital needs to make this work and leverage that funding. Will the experience of COVID encourage more private sector investment from a kind of an emotive and sentiment point of view, to be more, and it's been more visible that there are gains and returns to be made?
Yeah, no, I would say the answer to the question is I think there will be more investment. I don't think it's emotive or it's an emotive reason that's driving it. I think it is just shown that the life sciences industry in particular is actually hugely well insulated against shocks like this. The amount of money coming into the sector over the last 18 months has been driven by the fact that a number of other sectors have become uninvestable, and there is still the same amount of capital. And so almost, by default, had nothing happened to life sciences, it would have been more attractive. But the fact that people have seen real success stories coming through life sciences in that time, I think adds to it as well. So those factors are not going away. The more traditional businesses, the retail businesses, the traditional manufacturing businesses are not going to become attractive places for investors' money, in the near term. Certainly not in the way that they were previously. So, our thinking is there is going to be more money coming into the sector for a sustained period of time. It's just how do you how do you capitalize on that by making sure it gets funneled to, the really exciting devices and diagnostics and treatments, and not just the first thing that comes along.
If I may say something, this is Natalie Rao.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I am, we are an executive search in the biotech and an organizational consultancy, and we work both in the US and in Europe. And I have to say, I completely agree with what you said, Sam. I mean, we seem to be pretty much insulated against COVID, to be honest, and the pandemic. It seems it seems that there is never been so much money invested in the biotech sector. We are working a lot, and because they need people to lead those discovery programs, research programs, preclinical, clinical. I mean, it's endless, and I think if there is anything to hit the industry, is more that at some point the investors will want some results, and so we will need to be able to deliver those results, have good data in order to drive more investments. So I don't think it's really the political environment or the economical environment or the pandemic environment. For some reason, it doesn't seem to affect the sector. But I think there will be a cycle, and you can see some organizations which don't deliver. That shakes it when in the news. That shakes the biotech environment far more when there is a big failure than anything else. But when there is a big success, then suddenly everything goes frantic. That's how we perceive it, and we work with about 60 different biotechs per year. So I hope I can speak from experience. That's all I have to say.
Sorry, I was just going to say I completely agree about the point on results, and that will be the really interesting point, because the money that's coming in from other sectors, the model around biotech in particular is very, very different. So you are betting that it's quite binary. You either succeed in a very big way or you fail, and that's a very, very different investment model from every other industry that is around. And it's just how much do investors appreciate that, and how bold do they stay once the first and the second of the biotechs that they're investing in don't succeed, and the drugs don't progress through clinical trials. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Martin Postle, I know you wanted to
Sam, you're saying that obviously there is more money coming into the sector, partly because an awful lot of sectors are now uninvestable. But I also wonder whether another factor is that life science has been brought far more into the public consciousness because of the response to COVID. And I wonder if you had any data on the amount of retail money that's now coming into the sector.
I don't have anything to hand. I guess what we can say as an organisation is that I guess the order book from our side is probably as strong as I've ever seen it. So if you look at companies lining up either to raise public money or companies looking to go out and get further investment from a private perspective, it's incredibly strong. And it shows no signs of going away either. And I think that the point that you make is very valid. And you see, UK companies like Vaccitech is a great example, whereby that they have clearly struck from a valuation perspective at the right time in terms of their involvement in the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So high profile examples like that have certainly helped the sector. I guess the question will be, that Vaccitech is now a listed company and therefore will come under a lot more scrutiny going forwards. And I think this is probably something that a number of companies haven't anticipated. It's all very well raising the money as part of an IPO in the first place, but the level of scrutiny applied to public companies once they've got there is kind of a blessing and a curse, because you've got to keep, you know, repeatedly giving updates, positive updates to investors, which is often not how the life sciences industry works. You know, you can go for long periods of time without a further data release or any advances that you can report to investors. So it'll be interesting.
Good. I think we have a poll that was set up around that, the confidence of us reaching the 2.4% GDP target in 2027, the second of the preconditions. So Jazz, if I can ask you to share that and allow people to let us know how confident they feel.
Yeah, no problem. There we go. Give it a few more seconds. Give it 5 more seconds.
It's encouraging that we've got some this time at least up in the 80 to 100%, feeling really bullish on this one, which is good to see. Anybody from that optimistic end wish to share any thoughts? No, they're quite happy being optimistic. Let's go with that. Maybe not probing too far, they might get more pessimistic and want to change their vote. So we'll go with that. But I guess then you touched upon this in your opening remarks, Sam, about the access to governance of and everything around data and the NHS healthcare data. It's such a hot potato and has been for a long time, yet we're in an increasingly data-driven R&D process, really, and so forth. You know, what do you think is going to be a game shifter in there?
I think one of the things is that I think initially it was seen by NHS and by government as an immediate revenue source, and therefore there's a clamour to protect that data because that data is valuable. And I think that's probably looking at it the wrong way. I think the value in that data is in the advancement that we can achieve across the board. And I think that's probably the barrier that we've got to break down. And it is difficult because of some of the structures that are already in place around the data, and the fact that some of that has now there are companies who have entered into contracts with the NHS around certain data. Is that the greatest way forward for the UK industry? Probably not, but it's quite hard to undo what's already in place.
I guess that there is that element of you may not choose to start from where you are now, given what was the landscape beforehand. I mean, do you sense, I know ABPI have just launched their sort of survey about the perception of the pharma industry and how it's viewed by general public and stakeholders. Do you think something like COVID will increase that trust of patients, saying, okay, they're more likely to say that their data can be used in health research because they've seen the benefits directly to them?
Yeah, and I think if it's sold in that way, it's interesting that we have the strategy. I think it needs more than the strategy to appeal to the general public, and I think the message, and one thing that we don't disagree with in the vision is that if we can utilize the same approaches that we've had for COVID in other areas like cancer vaccines, for example, and increase the level of the scrutiny of the data that we already have, but also the willingness of people to who have the disease to take part in different trials as they go through. I think there has to be a positive outcome if that can be achieved properly. So I do think that there is a period of time, albeit a fairly short one, I would imagine, that we can kind of live off the value that's been created as in the post-COVID world.
And I suppose to some degree, And, we've seen it with the COVID genomics group, and particularly the role that, and we saw the report from BIA about the strength of genomics in the UK that was launched, I think it was just yesterday or the day before. So you've got that, but you've also seen this now kind of thing where you look at, I tend to, I guess we're based primarily in that sort of eastern side of the UK between London, Cambridge and outward. So you've seen areas like Norwich and the Quadram Institute heavily in microbiome, nutrition, and areas sort of almost on the fringes, I guess, of where we've generally thought about the life science strategy in our sphere and therapeutics. And so it almost strays over into sustainability. It strays over into microbial resistance, yes, but also, better use of microbes, if you like, and better understanding of the microbiome. So, do you think in going forward with this and the whole data stuff, there's going to be an awful lot of other sources of data? My sense is that it's going to be a much broader data set that we're going to have to be looking at and governing.
Yeah, I think it has to be. And if you look at I touched on it earlier on. If you look at some of the 7 missions that have been identified, there are things like obesity and aging, and which they're not. You can't tackle them using the traditional data sets that you would for a biotech, for example. The answers to them, and therefore the data sets that we need to obtain, are going to be drastically different. And I think it's great that it's in the vision as a recognition of these are areas that we need to advance in. As I said before, those are the ones that are going to be most difficult, I think, to advance in the same way that we've reacted to COVID, for example, because they're very, very different problems and therefore propositions to us.
Yeah, because I guess it's not just, genomics and molecular data. There's kind of lifestyle data in some of those disorders, and there's people's, how they live and work and travel and so forth.
Yeah, and that's right. And a lot of that lifestyle data is going to be from a very early age as well. And so there's likely to be more resistance at that stage, I'm sure, to kind of use of that data and collection of that data.
Yeah, and some of that, I assume, therefore, from an early age, but it's also from looking at sort of earlier intervention or even prevention by understanding, buying habits when it comes to diet, if you like. Take a sort of, so I'm sure many of the supermarket loyalty cards have all the data on what people buy and don't buy and what's healthy and not healthy at their fingertips. But then they wouldn't be so trusted if they were going to give this to research companies to come back and sell you other products. But I guess it's, how do we build enough trust? And how does the government build enough trust with the general population to make these sort of progresses acceptable and electable?
And I think moving from one end of the spectrum. So as I said before, the great thing about COVID was almost the real-time ability to utilize the data and change the way that we were approaching treatments and vaccines in relation to COVID. I think if you try and move too quickly to the other end of the spectrum on things like obesity, where there is such a longer term impact, and I guess the direct impacts are very low, I think there's going to be a real problem. I think by moving step at a time through things like cancer vaccines, for example, where you won't see as immediate return, but actually you can see the direct impact that's happening. And I think that will help to build up the trust that the data is being used for the right purposes, as opposed to kind of the big brother kind of fear that I think a lot of people had about COVID that kind of did disappear when they could see the rationale behind why that data was really important.
Yeah, I guess I think it's bringing it into a context where you can understand why it's important and how it's used responsibly, I guess, is what builds trust ultimately. I think now it's probably, as we enter into the final quarter, is that the next precondition was around data governance and getting this optimal for allowing research and development to continue. So we have another poll around that precondition about people's sense of confidence in that one. And we'll see if people are staying more confident or getting more pessimistic as we go over the course of the discussion. So Jazz, if you could pop that one up. It'd be great if people express their view there.
A few more seconds.
Okay, thanks everyone. Again, it's the sort of, you know, a not depressing picture of people feeling there's a fair crack at this on the whole, I think. But again, it's many things, it's in the balance. But anybody out of the audience want to express a view on the data side, particularly of how they feel that's going to go? Got a very quiet audience for that. And okay, if we'll move on then, because I guess what most people are concerned about, and I think this is probably for me falls in this final condition of it, falls into a couple of different camps, and we touched upon some of it in terms of access to capital and where's that money going to come from. But I wonder if you see, you know, we saw lots of financing coming into the sector, but as with all these things, it's never an even spread, and certainly in some of the earlier stage opportunities, it was more challenging for periods of that time where the money was going to come from. So do you have any sense, Sam, when they describe this access to capital, and as I say, we touched upon some of the levers that are happening, how that may affect sort of the earlier stage startup, SME, development stage companies compared to the later stage, we're on our way to market, or even the larger blue chip with the markets? Do you have any view on how that may differ?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if we reflect back on what's happened over the last 5 years, I think we have seen some pretty impressive advancements in the UK and the early stage company. But where they've come from is kind of I guess the more obvious or the more traditional sources. So we've seen Oxford Science Innovation, for example. I think the partnership that they have with the university has massively helped, and that's kind of professionalized the commercialization of companies coming from there. We've seen Syncona from a Wellcome Trust perspective, where again, I think that's had a big impact on the successful commercialization. I guess the question, and this is where I think the British patient capital can help, is kind of companies the startups that don't come from those more traditional routes of the academic institutions or the trust like Wellcome Trust, and I guess it is where it can help, but it's also more difficult because it's trying to find these opportunities and where they come from. I think them just putting more money into a spin out from Oxford University will probably be able to attract them better headlines, but I'm not sure it really helps on the kind of fundamentals that we already have in that area. So the thing that will be really interesting is to see exactly where they position their capital and how they play that going forward.
Sure, and then we've seen some announcements going, well, what funds are coming, and we talk about the Middle East Fund and the sort of £1 billion that they're going to leverage through all of these things. How do we scale that even further? What's the trick to getting larger, later stage, bigger kind of US banks and so forth investing in UK companies without them having to go necessarily to NASDAQ or relocate to the US?
I think the difficulty that we're in is that we, I think through no great design, but there is now a model established. So the model, 10 years ago was that you would spin out a company. So you would, we did, and we still have some fantastic seed investors. We had some good early stage, private equity, venture capital type investors at that stage. We had AIM as a platform that you could take companies public, and that was a route that enabled companies to stay in the UK. As I said, without designing it, I think that the more common route now, because the time from the commercialization of a product and attracting of significant investment has shrunk, that pathway now looks, the most common pathway now looks much more like you get Series A investment, potentially some Series B in the UK, but then you kind of flip overseas. And I think that's the bit that almost needs the success stories coming through to be able to say that actually we have seen the likes of OSI or Syncona, or we've seen some of the funds that we've seen over the last 18 months invest, and back to the point that was made earlier, actually make a return on companies as part of that journey whilst they're still staying in the UK. And that's not going to happen overnight. And I think reversing kind of the kind of default trend that we have at the moment is going to take a bit of time to do.
I guess that is our challenge. It's kind of changing, or reversing trends, changing habits to some degree. I guess it's a mindset of how some of these things are envisaged to play out when the investors come on board. And out of that, where does, if we look towards China and that sort of side, that was kind of talked about everywhere pre-COVID in terms of money that was coming into the sector. What's your sense now in terms of the interest from and in Chinese investors?
Yeah, I mean, we still see very heavy demand. I think that and it's interesting talking about the sector as a whole, because if you look at the preconditions of some of the Chinese money, they are, it comes with, you may get equity into the company, but it comes with an exclusive distribution agreement in China, which I guess you would imagine. But there's a lot of the investment comes in with manufacturing clauses in it as well. That the manufacturing, or at least some of it, will end up in China, which is the bit that we're almost giving up as a UK PLC from the life sciences perspective. You're almost foregoing that next stage of the industry. And it's interesting that you see that condition, very, very common amongst Chinese investors, almost never from the UK. So it's just not something that we're interested in.
Okay, Natalie.
Yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Sam is saying. I mean, I can see, as I said earlier on, we work with biotech, we help build up biotech and grow them. And we can see that if they have Chinese money in any guise you can think of sometimes, certainly from manufacturing, but also from a clinical development, you have ties and you have to get back to China for, we need to have some clinical operations in China, clinical development in China. You need to set, at some stage, you need to question yourself about that money and whether you remain in control of your own company. It comes with ties which are not necessarily reversible. That's again experience. We've got to be in my opinion, we should be very careful, and UK PLC should be very, very aware. And I'm not, fair enough from the Chinese standpoint. They've got the money. It's a powerhouse. They've got extremely sleek and sophisticated people now. In the old days, you would go to the conferences and you would see them coming from afar. But today, they can be pretty sneaky, I would say.
If I can just add a comment, I think China is not going to go away. It is already the second largest pharmaceutical market worldwide, and they would very much like to be number one. And if we think back over the years and even now, how we always sort of pander to FDA and meeting US requirements and seeking opportunities in the US, and I think it has to be similar in many ways with China, and whether it's an NMPD or whatever it's now called, CFDA as it was. It's a very large market. Many companies are interested in getting their products there because it's nearly a third of the world's population, so it's obviously of interest. Conversely, China's very interested in expanding elsewhere, not only through the famous Silk Road initiative, but in many other ways. You know, they've also sent a rocket into space a few times, so they're not short of the technology. And if you go to cities like Nanjing, which happens to be the last one I visited before the shutdown, and it may well be the last visit for a while, there is a university of pharmacy. The whole university is doing, and it's fascinating to visit their laboratories and see the industrial the model pharmacies for retail, but they have facilities which many small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe would be delighted to have just for training purposes. So I feel that how can I put it, tsunami hasn't quite reached us yet, but it's not going away. I don't know what the answer is. As I say, it's something we can't avoid, but you know, there are opportunities as well. It's a challenge, but I think that's a challenge that has to be met.
I couldn't agree more. It's not going to go away. So it's a case of how we deal with that dynamic in one shape or form, I'm sure. I'm conscious we've almost taken up your hour. We've got one final poll, so let's finish with a bit of a question of confidence around this access to capital, because without someone paying for it, I guess none of this is going to happen. So Jazz has kindly put it up, and we'll see how confident people are feeling from China or elsewhere. Okay, that's probably looking like the most positive result we've had across all four of them, I think. So, which I think probably quite rightly shows how much confidence there is in the UK innovation pipeline and strengths in this space to keep attracting investment. I guess very rapidly as we round out, I'll just highlight that Carolyn Douthwaite kindly put in the chat box for everybody that it was 1.7% of GDP in 2018, so we've got a little way to go yet. But on that as well, in terms of raising that capital for UK companies, I guess getting the business environment right, Sam, is going to be where do they spend that money? They bring it in, then outsource their manufacturing and trials elsewhere. I guess it then isn't quite what the government wanted in terms of scale.
No, exactly right, and you know, we have seen you know, probably over the last 10 years, like more and more the rise of the virtual company, particularly in the biotech space, where actually it is, you know, it is easy to outsource almost everything. And again, it's those sorts of companies, particularly if that outsourcing is outsourcing to overseas CROs or to CMOs, you know, there is a big question mark about how much is that benefiting the UK. The fact that we're pumping money into a UK company that's taking our R&D tax credits to pay overseas companies. So it is very difficult, because again, you know, the companies are doing that because it's a you know, an economically sensible way to do things. It gives them the flexibility to turn things on and off as and when they want. So again, it's a question as to what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to achieve scientific development, or are you trying to achieve jobs and prosperity and wealth in the UK? So it's often difficult to try and get both at the same time.
I think that's, for me, one of the things that has kind of felt as that very big challenge is with anything when you've got sort of diverse stakeholders, but maybe not all wanting the same thing. And that,
yeah, great.
Not just in our space, it happens in everything. I guess we wouldn't have been at discussions around Brexit if everybody around the table wanted the same thing. It's diversity of stakeholder, and you can't always align those easily. But thanks to everyone for tonight. Thanks particularly to Sam for sharing those insights and creating the scene, or setting the scene for us to go through some of that. You know, lots of devil in the detail and lots of positives and negatives in those devils, I guess. But thanks to everyone for engaging. I mean, for me, I'm probably an eternal optimist, so I'm going to hope we do meet all the preconditions and we do deliver the change, and we'll be at that last part of Nelson Mandela's quote, which is the fact it's a vision with action, and that's going to change the world. not changing the world this evening. I won't hold you up any longer, but I'll let you to go about your business to carry on changing the world you're in. And we'll look forward to reconvening at a time not too far from now, hopefully face to face soon in the autumn. And I shall see you all soon. But thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.